Welcome back to KON Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group. Attorneys since 1978 fighting the IRS, 1-800-BEAT-IRS. Also, beatirs.com. We have waiting on the line David Codrea. He is a longtime gun rights activist. He's a grassroots leader. David has been writing professionally on the subject of the right to keep and bear arms since 1999. He initially wrote for Guns and Ammo and then moved on to Handguns. For the last 8 years, he's written at Guns. He's a field editor and produces the monthly Rights Watch column. He was also a panelist selected by the New York Times to discuss the Virginia Tech shootings, and he's written about various news reports, including by the New York Times, Associated Press, Arizona Republic, WorldNet Daily, etc. I've been in contact with David for some time. He's one of the first guys to make the linkage between amnesty and gun rights. We're excited to have him on the program. He's a patriot working feverishly to make sure that our Second Amendment rights are protected. David, welcome to the show.
Joe, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, David, you're kind of at the tip of the spear on this issue, the Second Amendment. One of the things that we've recently seen in the news that worries a number of gun enthusiasts like myself is the effort of the Obama administration to now ban certain types of ammo, specifically 5.56 green tip. Can you tell us where the administration is at on that and whether you think they'll prevail in their effort to getting rid of that ammo?
Yeah, whether they'll prevail is a crystal ball question. Here's the thing. ATF put out what they call a framework, which they distinguish from a rule. And by that, I actually got a hold of the ATF contact person back on February 18th and published that they have bypassed the Administrative Procedures Act, which requires that these things get published in the Federal Register, and then they get opened up for comment. And while this is open for comment, and I believe it's March 16th where the comment question ends, don't quote me on that, but I think that's where the 30-day period will end. What you have is you have ATF accepting comments by email, but now that it's not on the regular government website, we cannot see what those other comments are to build on it. Basically, this is a fraudulent attempt to bypass the Administrative Procedures Act. It is a fraudulent attempt to ban ammo on a non-existent cause. There are no cops that are being, killed with these weapons defeating soft body armor. And if that's the case, any rifle ammo pretty much is going to do that. So if you're going to make the case that that's justification, then you'd better be trying to ban it all, which, of course, they don't dare to try to do.
Is that why, the 5.7, the FN 5.7, are you familiar with that cartridge?
Moderately. I'm not really a gun person, Joe. I'm more of a gun rights person. I kind of have to, be familiar with it, but I'm not really a firearms type person.
Well, the reason why I ask about that was developed by FN. It has the shape of a high power cartridge, but it's a small cartridge. And it was developed, again, European, purportedly to defeat body armor. And the FN made a pistol that actually shoots this cartridge. I think the standard issue clip is 20 rounds. And they also make then an AR-based FN round. Apparently by regulation, that AP round was banned by the ATF years ago. I mean, you can't even get the AP version of it because of that ban. Of course, most of these bans, they grandfather the existing ammo, so there's still you can still get it out there, but it's like $4 or $5 a round, something like that. Apparently, this is not the first time the ATF has gone this route. It's actually done it with other ammo, right?
Oh, yeah. Back in 2014, as a matter of fact, they put out an alert on it's actually a 5.45 by 39 caliber that I guess there was a Polish handgun, the Fabrica Brony Radom model Onyx 89S. Okay.
Sounds like you know guns.
No, I actually got clued in on this by internet contact and asked somebody who did know guns about this last night. And from what I understand, only a couple hundred of these pistols were ever built. But here's the danger. If you can ban something based on that, then what's to stop a Michael Bloomberg from saying, okay, fine, I'm gonna develop a handgun. I'm gonna use my billions to develop a handgun that'll take this rifle ammo so that we can get ATF to ban it. I mean, it's incredibly dangerous. And then when they revert to the sporting purposes usage as their rationale for banning these things, first of all, we have to look at where sporting purposes first came into the lexicon. And as much as people want to dismiss this as conspiracy theory, you can prove it to yourself over at Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership and figure out sporting purposes came into being in 1938 German law, which is certainly not something that the land of the Second Amendment ought to be emulating. And on top of that, Joe, where in the Second Amendment, I mean, I'm all for protecting sports, okay, but it's not about hunting ducks. The founders intended by the Second Amendment that we, the people, would be able to go to the field equipped with what was in common use at the time, not in terms of what the sportsmen have, but what you go to meet a military on the field with. That is what the citizen militia is supposed to have, and that includes machine guns, by the way.
Well, it not only includes machine guns, but it also includes cannons. I mean, there were private ships with cannons at the time of the Second Amendment's drafting. There is no doubt that it was intended to protect those type of things that you would find in a conventional battlefield back in the late 18th century. I wanted to go back to this whole concept, though, that the motivation of the ATF in trying to ban armor-piercing or body armor defeating pistol rounds, because there's a gun out there that you may have heard. It's a Thompson Contender. You can basically, there was an exception made in the ATF rules, by the way, to allow its conversion from a rifle down to a pistol. You just have to change out the stock. You put on the barrel. You better make sure you don't put on too short of a barrel with the gun stock, or else you've committed a felony. But as long as you piece the thing together right, you can fire almost every high-powered rifle cartridge out of that Thompson Contender pistol that's made. They have dozens of different barrels that fit that configuration. So if we do get to that point where it's an accepted standard that, look, we're going to ban cartridges that can be fired out of a pistol that defeat body armor, that's going to have a dramatic impact. And I think that's where they're headed with this, don't you?
It could be, but then you're going to run into a situation. You think prohibition was bad, and you think the war on drugs has brought out cartels and corruption and viciousness. Just wait till people have a demand for ammo that regular channels can't fill. I mean, obviously, look, they can't stop tens of millions of illegal aliens from coming into this country. What makes them, and then making them into citizens if Jed Johnson has his way? What makes people think that we are going to stand by and allow ammunition to be cut off from us? First of all, there are legal challenges to be done. Congress has to have the pressure put on them. And I hope everyone listening is aware of this story, and that you have contacted your congressperson and let them know, I don't expect platitudes. I don't expect to get back an email telling me what a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment you are. I want to know, Mr. Congressman, Mr. Senator, what the heck are you doing right now to make sure that this doesn't happen? And, of course, support lawsuits when those come about.
Right, and there are still some judges out there that recognize the Second Amendment's an individual right. When I went to law school on the East Coast back between, 92 through 95, there was a guy there, one of my classmates, that came upon this wonderful concept of writing a law review article on how the Second Amendment is actually a collective right. And I argued with that guy until I was blue in the face, historical basis, obviously, and he couldn't really pose any good argument against what I said, but he still managed to squeeze out the article that now has increasingly been accepted in modern jurisprudence. And fortunately, we've got at least one Supreme Court decision that reminds us it's an individual right. But tell us a little bit about the composition of the Supreme Court. I mean, how many friendlies do we have there now with respect to the Second Amendment?
Well, we take a look at the Heller decision and the McDonald decision, and those were both 5-4 decisions. So we are one vote away from a reversal of Heller and McDonald, and the Supreme Court has reversed itself on decisions before, and this is why the other subject that we were going to talk about, amnesty turning into a pathway to citizenship, becomes so critically dangerous, because how does the Supreme Court get on the bench? They get nominated by the president, and then they get confirmed through an advise and consent process.
Well, David, appreciate your insights on this. We'll talk more about the connection between amnesty and gun rights. There is a clear and present danger between allowing illegals in, giving them citizenship, the right to vote, and loss of gun rights. More on that in just a few with the Joe Miller Show. Stay with us. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, the Joe Miller Show. The show is made possible by the McPherson Group Tax Defense Attorneys. 1-800-BEAT-IRS, B-E-A-T-IRS, rescuing Americans from IRS tyranny. We have with us David Codrea. He is a gun rights activist, columnist, somebody that has some really good insights as to the threats facing our Second Amendment rights here in the United States. David and I have had contact before, talked a little bit about the connection between amnesty and gun rights. David, you probably saw what we did in 2014 during our race here in Alaska, saying that essentially everybody that supports gun rights ought to also be engaged in the fight against amnesty. You know, Snopes, and I think it was, and a few other leftist groups criticized the linkage, saying it wasn't credible. What say you?
Well, I actually wrote a column about that, exposing how they were lying about you, and that you weren't saying what they were accusing you of saying. Of course, you know that goes with the territory. I mean, having been through the meat grinder of politics, you probably understand better than anyone that perception becomes reality. That's why they rely on doing stuff like that.
Well, sure, but even more, I think, directly, you know, you were talking about if they can't stop those going across the border, how are they going to stop those that decide to create their own ammo if there's a ban? I mean, I think that there is an effort underfoot. And sure, I guess somebody could call this a bit of a conspiracy theorist. I don't see it that way. I think it's conspiracy fact. When you look at what this administration and its allies both on the left and right, I mean the rhinos and the Democrats, are doing with respect to amnesty, it seemed pretty clear that they intend to induce more to come across the border, that it's part basically of their political objective to create a leftward lurch in American politics. And, of course, that's going to have direct impact, if they succeed, on gun rights. Tell us why you think that.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and you know, the fact is conspiracies do exist, but the bottom line is no less an authority than Jed Johnson of Homeland Security has said that the illegal aliens have, quote unquote, earned the right to be citizens. Okay? We see from all credible polling, okay, that the aliens are overwhelmingly sympathetic to the Democrat Party, overwhelmingly sympathetic to big government, and overwhelmingly sympathetic to government control of guns. We see Representative Kurt Schrader of Oregon, who declared that immigration is going to decide who's in charge of the country for the next 20 or 30 years. We know that Obama is counting on it. And it's not just with, you know, what we saw with the Central American illegal aliens that came over, and then he took the kids and he had them bust out to places all over the country. It's other immigrant groups as well. It's letting in Somalis with terror ties, lie about their refugee status and bringing them in. It's part of the fundamental transformation of America that the president promised everyone he was going to bring about, and it is being actively aided and abetted by an establishment wing of the Republican Party and their supporters, the same people that you ran into in your campaign, who, whether it's just a matter of cheap labor or the bowl of pottage that they're going to turn in their rights for, I don't know what it is, but the bottom line is you're going to be looking at an unchallengeable Democrat majority in the near future if this goes through. And on top of that, with that unchallengeable legislative majority, which is going to be able to get whatever laws they want passed, they're also going to be able to confirm judges. And this Supreme Court mix that we talked about before the break, the 5-4, look for it to go in the other direction. This is incredibly dangerous. This is the destruction of the republic.
Right, and we've already seen the leadership of the establishment wing of the party be willing to create an axis with Obama over an axis with the constitutionalist. Boehner, of course, reaching across the aisle to fund DHS, short-term funding of amnesty. You know, there's no limit to their, well, I gotta call it treason, but certainly traitorship to the cause.
And, I mean, you've even seen the Democrats say, we're going to come over and we're going to protect Boehner from the repercussions of this, and why they could not have separated out the amnesty component, which wasn't even an executive order, as I understand it, that this, again, was a memorandum from Jed Johnson, okay, so that Obama could have his hands, conceivably clean if anything backfired, and blame it on his underling, as he is wont to do, just like he didn't know that Hillary was using personal email accounts or anything like that. But this is not even an executive order, and yet the gutless Republican leadership doesn't have the political courage to say, we are going to separate this out from the DHS funding. And then if it gets rejected on the president's desk, he's the bad guy. But they let themselves be cowed by the president and by the media into saying, well, we don't dare be portrayed as the people who defunded Homeland Security in our time of need. And it doesn't have to be that way, of course.
Well, of course, I don't even think it's cowing. I mean, I think that I believe the leadership, the establishment leadership of the party wants amnesty. They've got this concept of demographics, that they must become the friend of the amnesty-loving people, and that if they don't, they won't have the necessary votes to maintain majority leadership. And, I mean, that's just an upside-down picture. I mean, if that really is what motivates them, and that's possible, then obviously in order to continue that leadership, they're going to have to shift to the left too, which, of course, creates an opportunity potentially in the American politic to bring about a new party that perhaps can get the country back on track. I know that's a high threshold, lots of fundamentals that have to be in alignment to make that happen. But I can tell you, based upon what I'm hearing in the grassroots, and part of it is a result of the hard work that was done by gun-loving folk, conservatives, in the 2014 cycle, where they put it all on the line. They funded these good candidates, told by even establishment leadership that we get the majorities that we need in the House and the Senate. We're going to block amnesty. We're going to block Obamacare. And what do they turn around and do? After a wave election where the conservatives deliver the vote again to the Republicans, they turn their back on both of these fundamentals in such a way that it leaves most of us without any trust at all of the party. And I think that that's a dangerous ground for the country to be on, because the type of chatter that I'm hearing is that it's far better now at this point, because of the fact that most of the leadership of the Republican Party is on the traitor side of things. It's far better to create short-term loss, that some may perceive as short-term loss, in order to make it clear that our vote is no longer something that they can take and then act in a way completely opposite of what the votes were directed for. What do you think is going to happen in this next cycle, given what the Republican Party did in the aftermath of the 2014 wave elections?
Well, it could just swing back the other way, because people do not feel like they're we've been putting up with this lesser of two evils stuff for too long, and too many of us are sick and tired of it. And this business of, well, who else are you going to vote for? There is a quotation attributed to the late RNC chair Lee Atwater, and that was exactly it about gun owners. Who else are they going to vote for? The Democrats will really hurt them. Well, I'm sorry, but you know what? At some point, we're not going to surrender the Second Amendment, okay? And so at some point, once all means of redress have been closed off to us, well, then we're just going to have to go about our business and hope that the other side, that the people who want to control and take things don't get stupid. But I am done basically supporting people who are going to stab me in the back. I would rather have an honest enemy on the other side and know the guy's a Democrat than have an infiltrator on the inside who makes soothing noises and then stabs me in the back. That, to me, is the more dangerous enemy to have.
No doubt about it. I mean, the Democrat, you know where they stand. The Republican who masquerades as one that can slip things through, giving the soothing words, telling the people that, in fact, hey, this isn't as bad as you think, and yet all along they're carrying the agenda of the left. And that's been one of the major concerns that I've had as well in sitting back and making the decision. What do we do with respect to these folk that really aren't towing the line but wear the R label? I think it's increasingly one of these things that the American politic, the body politic, is going to have to address. One of the things I want to talk to you about after this next break is something that was raised by one of our guests last week, constitutional law attorney Chris Ann Hall. I don't know whether you've heard her or not, but she is convinced that D.C. is broken, that there's just absolutely no way to fix it, that the grassroots should basically focus its efforts at the state level. And she raises a similar contention that you do. You know, what are the feds going to do if they end up passing laws that infringe constitutional rights and the people don't obey. She believes that the federal government's a schoolyard bully. It won't actually carry out its threats that it's given before. We'll talk more about that with David Codrea after these messages, see what David's perspective is on what will happen if the government decides to push further against gun rights. Stay with us. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have with us David Codrea. He is a gun rights activist, writer, wrote for Guns and Ammo magazine, moved on to Handguns, last 8 years at Guns, field editor for the monthly Rights Watch column, that magazine. He and I have interacted in the context of the 2014 race. I've followed his work, a number of his articles on restoring liberty, and he understands the threat that we're under. David, before we go too far, I want you to let our listeners know how they can get a hold of you, support you, get your articles when they come out. Do you have a website?
Yeah, I have a couple, actually. My long articles are on davidcodrea.com. It's my name, DavidCodrea.com, one word. My blog is The War on Guns, and that is waronguns.com. And I think if you go to those two, you should be able to find my Guns magazine stuff and all my other stuff as well.
We were talking about, before we get into the question about whether or not, or what happens if the federal government pushes too far on this issue. First, I want to just touch back on the amnesty issue. There aren't many gun rights organizations out there that have drawn the direct connection between amnesty and gun control. Are there any others besides, well, I'll just let you tell us what the scope of the landscape is with respect to the NRA and other organizations.
Yeah, of the ones I know that Wayne LaPierre gave his speech at CPAC, and he mentioned all kinds of other issues, but he never mentioned amnesty as a threat. I know that the Second Amendment Foundation has rejected amnesty as a threat to gun owners, and the only ones who have come forward that I know about that I have worked with is Larry Pratt with Gun Owners of America, and I believe you've had him on the program before, and Larry actually came out and said that Gun Owners of America intends to score amnesty-supporting votes or amnesty-opposing votes in their political ratings, which I think is high time. And again, to anyone who wants to argue that this is not a threat to the right to keep and bear arms, what I challenge you to come up with is credible data, not just anecdotes and platitudes, that refutes the concerns about the effect amnesty and a pathway to citizenship will have on gun rights. And if you have that knowledge, why not share it so the rest of us can validate it? And my contention is you can't.
Well, so many organizations out there, and I've seen this since my involvement in politics, are basically, they've got their hand out for the dollar, but when you actually watch and see what they do, they aren't pushing forward the issues that they purport to stand for. Many times they're co-opted. Many times they're out there just to get the money, and they do nothing. There are a couple organizations out there that are supposedly fighting amnesty, and yet, in practicality, they're virtually doing nothing. They're standing still on the issues. And it's really frustrating, especially in the Tea Party realm. I mean, I don't know how many so-called Tea Party groups are out there with their hand out. 90% of the money goes to administrative cost, and then they engage in the wrong races. So I think we have to be really careful about who we support for organizations for particular issues, especially gun rights, to make sure that they're out there pushing the causes that are important to us and not being co-opted, not just simply supporting the establishment.
Absolutely, and don't just fall for a slickly worded ad that has all the right buzzwords. There are ways to check these people out and vet people before you send them money.
So getting back to one of the guests that we had on our program last week, where she basically said, we talked a little bit about what happened at the Bundy Ranch, talked about, some of these states like Kansas that have passed out laws that compel the arrest of federal agents if they come into the state of Kansas and they proceed to limit Second Amendment rights. I asked her a little bit about the pushback, what happens when you have either a constitutional crisis or another scenario where the federal government actually has to use some degree they've got, of course, financial force that they can use, but any type of compelling action. Can you tell me what you think is going to happen if the federal government succeeds in this latest attempt to ban ammo? Because this is not just a little thing. I mean, there are lots of AR-15s out there, millions probably in the marketplace, in ownership in private hands, and probably I would guess probably hundreds of millions of rounds of 5.56 out there in the marketplace. What happens if the ban hits?
Well, I would think that, first of all, that's not the only ammunition that fits those rifles. So the majority of the marketplace will go on to rounds that are more scarce, though. The market will certainly be affected, and supply and demand is going to take effect. But if you're talking about what happens if there is just this federal edict that people are in defiance of, in open defiance of, and not doing it, we've seen this happen at the state level, and I think we'll see a parallel with the federal government. We've seen it happen in Connecticut with the post-Newtown ban, and we saw that probably about 85% of gun owners just said, no, we are not going to register. We've seen it with the SAFE Act in New York. We saw it in California. Joe, you're talking to a gun criminal. I went when California DOJ said that we had to register our quote-unquote assault weapons. I went there and tore up their form in front of them and told them this is the only form you're going to get from me. And as I understand it, I was probably in the majority, and people just kind of keep quiet about that, so that the law becomes almost moot. It's still there, and they can still pick off individuals, but they, by and large, in terms of the whole population of gun owners, that doesn't happen. And we may see something like this play out right now in Washington State because they were banned by a federal judge. They were marching in front of a federal courthouse, and the cops arrested one of the demonstrators for violation of the law, but it turns out that you have to be inside the courthouse for that law to take effect. So a judge put out an emergency order and said, you can no longer be on the courthouse grounds, and if anybody comes and protests, we're going to get them for contempt of my order. And They went ahead with the protest, and now the word is, and again, I just published on davidcodrea.com today about how the word is coming out because the Southern Poverty Law Center has gotten involved and classified people who stand up for their rights in the Bill of Rights as haters so that it appears on the Hate Watch site. And there is talk right now about one person claimed that the U.S. Marshals told him they're going to go after and pick off some of these people one by one. They know who they are, but they're not going to confront them in a Bundy Ranch type of a scenario. They'll get them one by one after the fact.
I used to be a U.S. magistrate judge for a couple of years, and I don't ever recall any type of authority that a federal judge has that allows the federal judge to just reach out and touch somebody that's not a party to a case before it. That's just extraordinary that a federal judge would issue a contempt order against people that are on the courthouse grounds. I've never heard of anything like it. It's the activist courts that just think that they're the end all. And of course, to a certain extent, that's what our government's allowed.
Joe, do you remember when Paul Begala in the Clinton administration said stroke of the pen, law of the land, kind of cool? Yep. And I equated this with bang of the gavel, law of the land, kind of chilling.
It is, and I mean and I don't even know where you're at on this issue, but I think anybody that's concerned about where we're at in the American democratic experience ought to be concerned that when federal courts go in, and like in a state like Alabama where 80% of the people are against homosexual marriage, and a female federal judge goes in, not that she's female, it's just who she is. She goes in and she says, I am going to declare for the state of Alabama that homosexual marriage is valid. And then if you look at the process by which she did it, I mean, she first she throws out a probate judge because she wants her decision to have statewide impact, inserts the attorney general, then finds out, it's the probate judges that issue the marriage licenses, so adds back in the probate judge, and then tries to make the edict stick beyond the probate judge's jurisdiction. And it's not just that. It's all over the country where democratic laws that are passed out by legislatures getting set aside by the judiciary out of an activist perspective, out of one of their ideology as opposed to what the people want.
Yeah, and I actually got in trouble again in California for that because this was before they recognized gay marriages, and the city of San Francisco was going ahead and allowing them to happen in violation of the law. And so I wrote them. I said, well, wait a minute now. Are you guys in charge of the city the only ones who can break the law, or how about the rest of us? Do I have equal rights? What if I disagree with gun laws, because I'm a gun owner and I'm coming out of the gun safe, guys. And so what if I go up to San Francisco now and bring in weapons that you guys forbid. What are you going to do? Are you going to protect my right to be just like you and ignore the law, or are you going to have me arrested? And they actually opened up a police investigation, and I had a detective call me and want to grill me on whether or not I was going to come to San Francisco with AR-15s. It was hysterical.
So are you surely you aren't still living in California?
No, I'm in Ohio now. I was in California, and personal circumstances and just going nuts with a job that took too much out of me and wasn't worth the effort, brought me back to where I was born, which is Ohio, so that I could give my parents their grandchildren in their golden years, and I could get into a more sane environment.
Well, we're wrapping up top of the hour here, but we've got lots of great supporters in California. But as I told my wife, if you ever wanted to move to that warm state, we'd have to get rid of half my arsenal, and that's a no-go. So California will never be on our list of places to go as far as residing. Anyway, I appreciate, David, what you're doing. Obviously, the stand that you're taking, staying on top of the cutting edges that are important to the Second Amendment. We'll want to stay in touch with you. Like to continue to put up your pieces from time to time on restoring liberty, and I'm sure we'll have you back. Thanks again.